y'all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today I'm bringing you another episode across the pond. So, let's get into it, shall we? John Lowe was a dog breeder who met a woman named Sue Wilson, who turned out to be a dog groomer. The two started a relationship and moved out to Keepers Cottage Stud in Surrey, England. There, they had a successful business for over 20 years. When, in 1986, 32-year-old Christine Lee took her two daughters, Stacy and Lucy Lee, to go get a puppy after a split with her husband. Stacy recalls, the house looked like a fairy tale with animals everywhere, pretty much. Both girls were excited at the idea of getting a new puppy. They head to Keeper's Cottage Stud, again run by the now 58-year-old John and his partner Sue. The family picked out a puppy, and John asked if Christine would go out on a date with him. You see, he kept telling Christine that Sue was just a live-in housekeeper. She did, and the two soon became a couple. For a while, Christine would live months at Keeper's Cottage, and then not. And eventually, due to the amount of debt Christine had and the trouble with getting a house of her own, she ended up moving in with John and Sue and bringing her girls with her in order to save money. The young girls, Lucy and Stacy, began helping on the farm. Stacy reported that John was funny, loving, and kind at first, though he sounds like he was always sort of physically abusive, as Stacy did state, quote, "Yes, he hit us, but it was not like what we experienced before," end quote, referring to how the girl's biological dad was abusive before Christine had left him. But even that began to change. The girls went from helping on the farm to being required to do all of the chores within the farm. John changed from being a kind and giving man to a controlling and violent one. Stacy reported that if the dogs weren't breeding correctly or weren't up to standards, he would simply shoot them in order to dispose of them. He then forced the girls to do pretty much anything he wants, and at one point, Stacy makes mention of how she had to climb into a pen with 12 German shepherds in order to get a key that had been locked on the opposite end. According to Stacy, some of these dogs were pretty vicious, and she was actually pretty excited that she managed to get through the pen without even getting bitten. John slowly starts to become verbally and then more physically abusive to both Christine and Sue. Because remember, Sue's still at the farm. In August of 1996, Sue and John physically fight. When police arrive, John makes a statement that he wanted to shoot Sue. An officer requests to have John's shotgun removed, but at this time, the result comes to nothing. They don't take the guns, they don't do anything. He's considered an upstanding citizen, and pretty much it sounds like nobody believes Sue. In December of 1997, John gives Sue money and tells her she needs to leave, but Sue reportedly stated that she is owed half of the worth of the business. After all, she was there from the start and she helped build it to what it was. Until that happened, she simply wasn't going to leave, and so she stayed at Keeper's Cottage Stud. By the time John is 68, the puppy business starts failing. John allows the dogs to inbreed. He kept them in inhumane conditions and really just started to neglect them. By March of 2004, environmental health, animal services, and police all start to come together. An undercover operation is completed, and this results in the loss of his licensing to breed. And by 2005, John ended up admitting to 6 breaches of license conditions under the Breeding Dogs Act of 1973 and faced both a fine and 2-year disqualification from breeding. But even a full year later, John kept breeding and selling his dogs. In 2007, the now 30-year-old Stacy moves away from the family in order to begin one of her own. Stacy reports that she wanted to get her children away from men who scream at women. This causes tension with John and the remaining women in the house. A further investigation in 2008 saw him convicted of illegally breeding dogs again, and for this, he paid fines and costs totaling €11,000 and was again disqualified, this time for a period of 5 years from breeding dogs. In March of 2009, John has been prosecuted twice for illegally breeding dogs and then the theft of another purebred dog. By 2012, Stacy is living in Aldershot with her husband and 2 children when a chance meeting with John ended up resulting her going back to the property at Keepers Cottage Stud. This was because by February of 2012, Sue's health declined and Stacy opted to return home in order to help Sue after seeing that Sue was sleeping on a mattress on the floor in the house and lived in just some pretty squalid conditions. Stacy stated of her return, quote, "John was like a dad to me and Sue was like a second mom. So my motivation, as I saw it, was to help my parents." End quote. Again, the house was falling into disrepair at this point. Stacy reported that John's attitude was terrible and erratic around this time. Stacy attempted to move Sue into her own place, but John purportedly freaked out and threatened her, and so Stacy ended up bringing Sue back into the home. Stacy continued to care for Sue for an entire year until she passed away in March of 2013. And once Sue passed away, John's behavior simply worsened. One day he threatened Stacy as she was doing dishes at the sink, racking the shotgun and threatening to kill her. Stacy immediately left the home for good and reported it to police. It is finally at this time that officers from the Surrey police seized a shotgun license and a number of licensed shotguns, removing them from John and the home. At the same time, Stacy and family friend Mandy pretty much take the remaining dogs within the house and bring them into Stacy's house. At which point, Stacy says that at one point her own home was overrun with dogs while they were trying to figure out what to do with them. As he watched them remove the dogs, standing next to police, he stated, quote, "If I had my guns, I'd shoot you." End quote. This is literally right next to a police officer who can hear him. And later, Stacy ends up withdrawing her complaint against John in order to pacify the house. And if you think about it, really, John was a dad to Stacy. That's the man she grew up with, so I'm sure this had to be hard mentally for her. Then, on April 11th, 2000, then on April 11th, 2013, John called the police and requested his guns back. You see, he reports that he had a rodent problem, specifically a rat problem, and he needed his guns to kill them. Stacy says of this, she had never seen John use a gun to kill a rat in the previous years that she had lived with him. He simply threw down rat bait. Still, police end up returning 5 of the 7 guns John owed by May of 2014, along with his permit. According to Lucy's partner, Matthew Richardson, in 2014, Christine and Lucy were spending about 4 days a week at John's house helping take care of this very elderly man at this point. Matthew further stated, quote, "He was extremely under the weather and malnourished. He wasn't good financially, physically, or in any other way," end quote. But that John was, quote, "charming and also difficult," end quote. And he told police that he would sometimes act like a, quote, "child throwing his toys out of the pram," end quote. Really, it sounds like John had some memory issues at this point, probably some dementia, which can have some aggravating factors. 4 months later, on February 23rd, 2014, Christine and Lucy had decided to move out completely from this house. They had begun moving their items, and Lucy had packed her car. Christine's items were placed in boxes and pretty much ready to go. Lucy called Matthew that day and told him that John was trying to get his guns out of the cabinet. Excuse me. Matthew stated later, quote, "She was not calm, somewhere in the middle, slightly stressed, and she asked me to pick her up," end quote. According to Matthew, he was concerned about allowing him access. Quote, "She felt that it would be a threat to her and her mother," end quote. And over the phone, Matthew arranged to pick up Lucy at around 3 p.m. and reportedly overheard John acting, quote, "agitated, but not over the top," end quote. Then, a 999 call. Quote, "My mother's just been shot. Keepers Cottage Stud. My mother's just been shot. Keepers Cottage Stud," end quote. She reported she was running for her life on the phone. And Lucy's last words to emergency services were, quote, "I don't know if I'm going to be alive if I go back in there. He shot my mum. Bye," end quote. While John later reports that what happened that day was an accident, that he was simply attempting to shoot unhealthy dogs, what he did do was go to the living room and shoot Christine Lee in the chest at almost point blank range, while she was pretty much on her knees, they believe, directly in front of him. Lucy ran back to check on her mother when John found her. Later in trial, it was suggested that Lucy had been shot in the back of the head in the farmhouse utility room, first according to the blood spatter evidence, then stumbled outside before collapsing on the steps behind the house. John shot her from behind at a distance of about 9 feet initially. Lucy was then beaten until her face was black, according to her sister. 45 minutes later, he came back and shot her for a second time. John had to reload his .410 caliber double-barreled weapon between the shots. When EMS arrived, Lucy was pretty much clinging to life, but she didn't make it to the hospital. The body of Christine Lee was found where she had been shot inside the main building, and Lucy Lee had made it near the animal pens. An hour later, there was a standoff in which John surrendered himself to police, and John's first words to the arresting officer, PC Chris Gleason, were, quote, "They have been giving me shit for weeks," end quote. John later amended his statement, stating that the women were shouting at him, and so he accidentally shot both of them. In October of 2014, the trial began at Guildford Crown Court. The 999 call, where Lucy reported that John had killed her mother, Christine, was played, along with her harrowing message that she was going back in for her. And during trial, John insisted that the shootings, again, had been an accident. This time, he said, a faulty safety catch and a highly sensitive trigger resulted in the gun going off during a tussle with Christine Lee. To refute that, prosecution brought in a firearms expert who told the jury that it was, quote, "a purposeful act," end quote, to pull the trigger. Quote, "You don't just touch it and it will go off. You have to physically move your finger back to pull it," end quote, he said. In the court, in the end, the jury convicts John of murder of Christine and Lucy. It is here that the court makes mention that if the guns had not been returned, it is unlikely John would have been able to perpetrate a crime against these women. As a reminder, he is 82 years old when this happens, when he had killed both the women. Christine was 66, and Lucy was 44 when they were murdered. According to The Guardian, prosecutor Mark Dennis, QC, said there had been a, quote, "persistent failure by the defendant to show any true remorse at any stage for what happened on that day," end quote. He called for a minimum of 30-year term for Lowe, arguing that he had aggravated the murders with his intention to kill. John's defense counsel, Ian Lowry, QC, said before the sentencing that his client understood that he would have to live until 112 to have a second chance of being released. Quote, "I have to be blunt. The reality is, whatever sentence is passed, and there has to be a sentence that reflects the gravity, he's going to die in prison," end quote. He said, Mr. Justice Singh praised Lucy Lee's, quote, "remarkable act of courage," end quote, in making a 999 call after her mother had been shot, and then, returned to confront John, only to be shot twice in the head and chest. He said John, quote, must have chased Lucy Lee in order to shoot her dead after the first shot, end quote, which was one of several aggravating factors in this double murder. In the end, John was sentenced to a minimum term of 25 years for the double murder, along with an additional 10-year sentence for the possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life, and the sentencing was carried out on October 31st, 2014. 4 years later, John is diagnosed with cancer and dementia and is placed in hospice within the prison. On August 4th, 2018, he ultimately dies. Quote, as with all deaths in custody, there will be an independent investigation by the prisons and probation ombudsman, end quote, a spokesman said of this. And this is the case of John Lowe. And as for him having his guns returned, there was an independent investigation done on the allegation of misconduct and oversight in giving John his guns back. Unfortunately, it didn't lead to anything. Really, it doesn't sound like. All three of the people that were involved in returning the guns were not further prosecuted after this independent investigation was completed. And unfortunately, that's it. To all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.